you rebel scum.
Welcome back to Propology. Now today we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to talk about one blaster, but we're going to talk about that blaster through all of the original Trilogy movies, A New Hope, Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi. And that blaster is the DL-21. Now, a lot of people don't even realize that this blaster was in A New Hope. It actually wasn't seen, but it was on set while filming. This blaster was Ponda Baba's blaster. Now, there are some weird things with Ponda. His hands change and his blaster changes. So, regardless, his hand's one way until he loses his arm, and his hand's different, and his blaster's different when he loses his arm. Now, this is an AR-7 survival rifle made by Charter Arms, and then Henry Arms bought the pattern and started producing it, and they still produce it today. Now, there's no real big difference except for the Henry Arms version is actually more reliable than the Charter Arms version. Besides the name difference, visually, there's only one other thing that's different, and that's this right here, the barrel nut. The barrel nut is totally different on the Henry version, which this is the Henry version, so I had to make a barrel nut for this one. Moving on down to the scope, in A New Hope, it used one of those Japanese made 4x20. They're like almost like air rifle or 22 rifle scopes. They modified this scope by cutting off a large section of it and adding on a reticle from another vintage scope. I'm not sure if anybody really knows what scope they used. I found a good possibility. It's an old vintage Higgins scope, and they just removed the reticle piece and put it on the 4x20 Japanese scope. Now, in Empire Strikes Back, they used a single point scope, but the single point scopes they used is very similar to the way they did it on the Empire Strikes Back DH-17s. The scope was cast with the scope rings cast on it. Also, something I forgot to mention about the body, in Empire Strikes Back, they're all fiberglass castings. But anyway, going back to Empire Strikes Back, they cast these and produced them for the movie very much the same way they did the DH-17 scopes. They're all cast one piece with Weaver scope rings cast on, and they didn't have the thumb screws to tighten the scopes down. They were all glued in place. For Return of the Jedi, I believe they used a leftover blaster from Empire Strikes Back. So it has the same cast body with the same Greeblies and the same scope. Now, flash suppressors. In A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back, they used a British 2-inch mortar fin. Now, in A New Hope, the charge cap, the cap where you remove and drop a charge in, the charge that fires a mortar is very similar to a shotgun shell or a blank shotgun shell. You drop it in and then put the cap on, and it has a hole in it. And when you drop it down the mortar tube, there's a firing pin at the bottom that makes contact, fires the charge, and then boom, out goes the mortar. So in A New Hope, the charge cap is there. In Empire Strikes Back, there's no charge cap on the fins. And even though all the blasters in Empire Strikes Back are all cast, all the fins are real. They're all real, authentic fins. In Return of the Jedi, the biggest difference from the Empire Strikes Back is the fins are gone. And that actually, if you look at it, that totally changes the profile of the blaster. With the fins and then without the fins, it's a totally different looking blaster. I think that's kind of cool. Moving on down to Greeblies. There's a lot of stuff going on this blaster. And we're going to go ahead and start with all the pieces that are on here from the Revell Visible Engine Kit. Starting off with this piece right here. This is the oil pump base, part number 78. If you move forward, there's a Greebly here and a Greebly here. Those two Greeblies are actually both halves of the fuel pump, and those are part numbers 86 on the left-hand side and part number 88 on the right-hand side. And then we have right here between the base here, we have two Greeblies between the oil pump base and the fuel pump half. The lower Greebly is just a round thing. And what I think this might be is from a model kit tree. You know how model pieces are all in these trees and you snip them out and glue everything together. Well, you could snip these tree limbs off And then I think that's probably what that is. And just above it is the fuel pump lever or fuel pump actuating lever. It's been trimmed down. And we have the exact same part on the other side at the top. And that part number is 87 of the Revell engine kit. So you have two fuel pump levers, number 87, one on the left and one on the right. Now on the left-hand side, we have a 6-pin Molex connector. Molex connectors, if you've ever built a PC, you'll be familiar with Molex connectors. They're made to create wiring harnesses. This is a 6-pin Molex connector that's been trimmed down. Below that connector is kind of a mystery Greebly. And no, I'm not really sure what that is, but I have a theory. This piece is I believe is a highly modified part from a replica firearm. And that replica is a Browning high power made by the Nakata company, kind of a similar company to Model Gun Corporation. And in their parts list, this is listed as part number 36. This thing has been chopped and cut down a lot. This part does show up on other blasters, which gives me a good indication. That's actually how I discovered the part and noticed that it's very similar, and with some modifications, very simple modifications, you would be able to produce this piece right here. And also, there are two pieces here and here between the Molex connector and the front of the fuel pump. And I believe those are just some pieces of Centra, just some thin Centra they cut and glued on here. There's no real detail to them. They're just cut and sanded and fitted on. And that is the DL-21. It's a cool blaster, and like I said, it was in all three, or it was there for all three of the original Trilogy movies. Thank you for joining us while we dissect this really cool blaster, and join us next time when we pull another prop out and tear it down and see what it's made of.